So today we're going to be focusing on inquiry-based learning, and I'll elaborate more on that later.
Great.
But for your objectives today, you're going to be able to think about the society I live in and how music relates to it. Brainstorm with my peers about project topics. Yes, you are getting a project.
Yay!
I will be able to make my own question, which I can research. And finally, I will be able to start researching and working my project by the next class.
Cool. Yay!
So with that, let's move. Okay, so this is a good introduction to what I want to introduce us to next for the unit, which is going to be our project for the unit. So what it's going to have to do with genres of music and cultural/societal issues. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a question which you guys are going to think of on your own. And then what you guys are going to do is you're going to have to research the question and then reflect on your evidence. So that's just the basic overall outline of what your project is going to be. And so what I want to go over really quick is what is a good
What's a good?
So, can anyone give me an example of what they think is a good question?
Will you marry me?
Is that a good question?
Yeah, it's a great question.
Why is it a great question?
Because you get to be in love forever.
Okay, so we have emotion. We have an emotional question. Do we have any other kinds of questions? What do you think is a good question? Why can't I find a girlfriend? So why is that a good question to you?
Because it's important to me with my love life.
So that's another emotional one. Can we think of anything else that isn't
Do
emotional?
you want to go to Taco Bell?
Do you want to go to Taco Bell? So would you say that's simple or a complex question?
Complex.
Simple.
Why would you say it's complex?
Because there's so many things to order on the menu, and I love all of them. So.
Right. Okay. Why do you think it's simple?
Because it's just a yes or no.
Okay. So we have simple questions. Yes. No. There's really not much left to be decided after you say yes or no. You're either going or you're not.
It maybe go.
So can we think of what would a complex question be? Yes.
Where does everyone want to go?
Where does everyone want to go eat? That's complex. Why is that complex?
Because it's a question that is people can through it.
So you could say, oh, what? Yes.
Add on, people all have different tastes. And it will be hard to agree on one.
So we have multiple opinions.
Simple for me to pick Taco Bell.
And
We know.
could you also say that it could lead to some discussion, which might change your frame of reference?
Yes.
About where you might want to go. Perhaps I want to go to Mexican food, but then someone mentions, oh, Olive Garden sounds pretty good. I'm like, oh wow,
Mm-hmm.
Italian. breadsticks.
Expensive.
Breadsticks are the best.
So you can see here that a complex question is what we're going to want to ask. So thinking about what we have done earlier with our music genres and our cultural/societal issues, can you think of a possible research question that you'd want to ask that would be complex enough for you to gather research, essentially? David?
Why were most jazz musicians doing drugs before they played concerts?
So, would you guys say this is a complex question?
Yeah, it's emotional.
Oh, would you say it's emotional?
Yeah,
Why is that?
because it follows a person's story in their life.
Interesting. So I would probably say that this could be a complex question that could lead to some emotional responses. So this is a great question, but what I'm looking for for this project is more of how one has affected the other. So try and think about how this has affected this. So we could maybe, how could we change this so that one affects the other? Or maybe like there's music written about. The evidence that you're going to use, I forgot to mention this, is actually going to be in the form of music that you can find on YouTube or Spotify. So you're going to be analyzing different music to justify what your answer is to the question for this project. So when you're, keep in mind that aspect when you're trying to think of a complex question. So did you have a way to
What does country music say about marriage?
interesting, okay. What does country music say about marriage? All right, so you can see here that we have some pretty complex questions. Oh, what? Did you have some?
Oh, no.
Yeah.
This is a good question. How has the musician affected the marriage relationship?
Say that again. How is being a musician?
Affected the relationship between two people in the marriage?
That's a great complex question, but we want to focus on actual specific genres for this project. But that could be something you might want to look up on your own later. But
How does rap impact suicide rates?
that's perfect because that's something that you could go and look on YouTube, different rap videos or rap songs involving suicide, or maybe, and you can gather different opinions based on that. You can give the negatives, the positives, and so you can see that there's just many different avenues for us to go. So what I want us to do now is in our groups, I want us to think about and brainstorm what some possible topic questions you might want to do for your project. So let's just pair Claire, Shaylin, and David, and you guys just get together and talk amongst yourselves about what kind of research questions you might want. Think about how you could tackle this, and I'll come around and answer any questions. Yeah, feel free to move. It's okay.
Woo! That was hard. How does bluegrass encourage domestic violence?
Claire, that honestly, that could be a potential
It
question.
totally is.
So, how could you form that into a
There's
question?
actually, how does bluegrass influence like drug and alcohol usage? And there's actually a bluegrass song called "Whiskey Before Breakfast." So that could definitely.
Really quick class. So when you're doing this, think of something that you actually want to use, because you could think of something that's completely out of there, like I don't know, how has classical music influenced marriage? That would be really hard to find information on. So when you're doing this, keep in mind the practicality of your question. So yeah, continue.
Could you do it backwards? Like, how do drugs affect rock and roll?
Yeah, actually, I didn't think about that, but I think that's perfectly good because that still leads to avenues where you can analyze whether the drugs have affected something.
And with classical music, sometimes composers would be like Berlioz was on drugs when he composed Symphony.
Yeah, exactly.
So
that's very good.
ooh,
Yeah.
I'm in high school and I know.
So there's a lot of open avenues. So continue with your discussion.
Classical music. Well, jazz. Oh my gosh. Because it's what they make music about, and it's how it impacts their creative minds. Mm-hmm.
Oh, and David brings up another good point. I like what he said. Say what you said again.
How has drugs affected rock and roll in the 50s?
So you heard he actually made it specific. He said it in the 50s. So you guys can even narrow it down to something even more specific. So then you can narrow your frame of reference. make it a little bit easier on yourselves. But yeah, just keep that in mind. So do you guys have a good feel of what the project's gonna
Ensue.
So what I want us to do next as class is coming to an end is I want you guys to individually now grab your pieces of paper and silently think about what you think your topic is going to be for next class. Because what I want us to do for next class is I want us to go to the library and we're going to start actually researching our topics by listening to music and gathering information about that. So go ahead and try and pick one that you're leaning towards, but if you have maybe two that you're thinking of, you can write those down, and that will be good. Yeah.
Do we have to bring headphones?
Headphones will
Oh. Be at a private school or something?
music.
Oh. So it makes sense that I know about Berlioz.
Yeah.
If I'm super rich.
You're just enthusiastic about music.
I'm
You've already looked
so-
all this up. It's music appreciation. You're
Oh yeah. Wasn't that our last unit?
It was.
Oh,
Great job.
Whoa. Alcho Hall.
It's ALCOHOL. Oh,
What is Alcho Hall?
yeah. ALCOHO. All right, and as you're finishing up your exit slips, just you can feel free to pack up and start to line up to head out the door. Just keep in mind for next class, try and think about some beginnings of what you might want to research. Try and keep in mind both sides because we might have one opinion, but we can always have our opinion changed through research and reflection. So yes, class.
I have a question.
Yes.
What would you choose for your topic?
What would I choose? Well, that depends. It depends on what I'm interested in because I'm very interested in, I'm very interested in classical. But I don't know if there would be something very practical for you to write about in terms of cultural and societal. Yeah, see, there's some weird stuff. So what I would probably do is I'm also a fan of jazz. So I think something like I think someone mentioned a question about jazz and drugs. So I think how has jazz been influenced by the use of drugs in the past, and how has it? And then I would probably go down the avenue of how it's affected it positively and also negatively, and maybe even go into aspects of how it's affected the music versus the people. So there are just many different ways you can go, and we'll narrow it down later on while we're in class. But yeah, I feel like that's a good spot for us to end for today. So thank you, class.